detailed photos of the women, whether it's a lipstick or their hands or something. There's very broad photos of the topography of where you were, taking your photographs. So I was wondering, before you started the book, did you have an idea of what you wanted it to look like, or did you think, I'm just going to take a million photos and then kind of piece it together as it comes together?
Yeah, no, thank you. Good morning. Thank you everyone for being here. That is a great question. And I wish I could tell you that I planned ahead of time and that I had 2 years to kind of grow the idea in my mind, but it didn't happen that way. And I think,
Never does.
yeah, in life we just have to figure it out.
Yeah.
So for me, I just had 2-3 weeks to simmer this idea in my mind, because how it happened is that I was living in the US and my husband got an offer to go to Colombia for work for a year. And I say, well, we're gonna go to Colombia for a year. I'm gonna take this opportunity as my own too. I'm gonna make this book. So when we went to Colombia, we only had 3 weeks to pack everything here, to put it in storage, and to travel to Colombia. And those 3 weeks were basically the 3 weeks where I really thought about what do I want to make. So it kind of happened how you describe it. I had 60,000 photos that I took. Of course, as the travels went by, the more women I visited 62. When I was maybe 10 women already, I started seeing similar themes. So I said, oh, okay, I like some the iconography of these farmers. So I saw a lot of them putting on lipstick right before I took the portrait. No, can I go and put in a lipstick? So I was this reminded me of my grandmother, because my grandmother was also a coffee farmer, and she used to be like that, you have to put on lipstick before you take a photo. So I saw those kind of themes and those photos that were I could see my family and it resonated with me, but I also understood that I was making a book about women coffee farmers, so I needed to give context of the place, as you say, topography, where these women are located, how secluded these farms are, but also the intimacy, how the rooms, the bedrooms. How does a farm look? Because not a lot of people know, right? And then my style as a photographer, which I brought a lot from fashion photography because that's what I thought I was gonna pursue. And then I have the documentary style within my work. So it's a mix of the two of those.
Do you have any favorites as you now that the book is done, do you look back and go, that farm, that woman, that pose, was there something that sticks out that was really special to you?
Yeah, it's hard because of course you get attached to a story, and I think it happens with any product or anything in life. We forget about the product, we always think about the human. So you're I like that woman more, or her story resonated with me, or I like this about her. But definitely the photo of Sara, the farmer that is laying down on parchment coffee, which is dry coffee, that one really, I think, showcases not only her personality, but my style as a photographer.
Yeah, because I love it. A lot of the photos are women walking away. You'll see their braid or their hair, and you don't see that in most books. I sort of noticed that right away. It's not always a portrait or someone looking right at the camera, which is kind of an interesting way, or you see them through the leaves. So it's a very pretty way to photograph the book. When you started, because of Colombia is such a large area, how did you decide what farms? Because I know the travels you described to get to certain farms, the drive, the walk, the trek. So how did you pick those farms, those women, collectively to be in the book?
Yeah, so the first thing I did when I came with this idea of I'm gonna make a coffee book about women coffee farmers, is okay, how many women am I gonna visit? So the good thing is I had a year. So I had a deadline. I was I have a year. How many women can I visit? And then I was how am I gonna get to those farms? And how am I gonna get these women to agree to be photographed and receive me in their farms? I've been working in coffee. I'm from Colombia. I have a coffee background. But you don't want someone just coming into your home and taking photos of your room, taking photos of your kitchen, taking photos of yourself. So what I did is that I got in touch with a lot of companies, in Colombia, coffee companies. And I pitched the idea. I say, hey, I want to make a coffee book. It's really hard for me to get to all these places by myself, and also to afford all the expenses to travel throughout Colombia for a whole year. So what if you guys help me create the bridges with some of these women from your programs, and I can offer you guys some photos that you can use for your marketing material, and then others that I won't share with you, and those are the photos that are gonna make it into the book. And then if I have full control of what I'm posting, what I'm publishing, what I'm writing. So that's how I did it. So I had the privilege and the fortune, I was fortunate enough that all these companies, they say yes immediately.
That's great.
And so that's how I traveled. So we didn't choose women by like their stories or their names or their locations. They basically gave me a list with the women in different regions of Colombia. So with what company say, okay, we're gonna visit this region that is called Huila, that is one of the biggest coffee producing regions in Colombia. And they gave me a list. So we have, 150, here's the list. And I say, okay, let's go visit the number 10, the number 20, the number 5.
Perfect.
And that's what we did. And that's why I ended up going to farms that were so remote. As you were saying, in some of these places I had to take first a fly, then car ride, then motorcycle, and then walk for hours until I got to the farm. So it was a lot. But that also puts you into perspective. I'm Colombian, I work in the coffee industry. And even though I had that experience, and I thought I was biased, I was like, I think I know what I'm gonna find. But when you have to do it yourself with this heavy backpack, you're like, oh, this is not easy to do. And they have to carry all that coffee out of the farms.
Right. And I think you said it's 70% of the coffee production in Colombia is done by women. So you think about, we sort of take our coffee for granted. You don't think much about it, but when you look at your book and you go, and all these women and their beans contribute to probably what we have on a daily basis, it's really amazing the amount of work that's done.
Totally, yeah. So it's 70% in the global production of coffee that they do. So I always like to say because now we see coffees that are marketed that women produce coffee. And it's nice to have that niche. But I always like to say, I think most of the coffee that we drink, there's a woman involved in that coffee. And the funny part is in that 70% that is the labor that women do in farms is the drying, the picking, everything, the post-processing. But what is not included is all the work they do at home. So a lot of these women, they're the ones in charge of cooking for these farmers, for the workers in the farm. Because some of these farms are small enough that the family themselves, they can go and they can pick the coffee, and it's like a family-run business, there's no one else involved. But most of these farms, that's not how it works. They need workers during the peak of the harvest, so you can have 40 men and women living in the farm, and who is gonna cook for them? So usually it's that mother, it's that woman, and that labor that is crucial is not included in that 70%.
Wow.
And so it's the labor of the coffee production, the cooking for the workers, but then taking care and raising their kids.
Yeah.
So I always, even in the book, there's a part where I say I would like to say that these women are superheroes, but they're not, because they don't have time for themselves.
Yeah.
So how unfair. They do a lot of the work, but they don't get recognized, worse, they don't get paid for it, because a lot of the farms are not under their names, the deed is on the husband's name, under the husband's name. So that's why I wanted to create a book about women coffee farmers, because I knew there were a lot of women doing a lot of work, and
their stories aren't heard. I think that's one thing you were saying, is that these women were, for the first time, able to have their story shared, and nobody had, I think you said nobody's really asked them before, what's their story, or what was their life like? Because a lot of them had they have hard lives. They've had maybe children early, which might have called their dreams of maybe going to university, things like that, were changed due to their family circumstances. So, and I know this was sort of inspired by your grandmother in a sort of a reverse order, realizing, you want to tell the story sort of about how you're realizing that your grandmother actually shared the story of these women.
Yeah. So, I agree with you. I think most of these women haven't been heard before. And even me being a woman, being in Colombia, working in coffee for 10 years before I published the book, I didn't realize that until I sat down with them. Because before I pulled the camera out of my bag, I spent hours just talking with them, interviewing them. They also like to know about you before they can open up. And at the end of the whole trip, the phrase I always heard is oh my God, I have never said this before, and no one had ever shown interest in hearing my story. So thank you for hearing me out. And I think that's the most beautiful gift, not only for a farmer, for anyone. What we want is to be heard, right? So and how I found like this what you were explaining about how I found that my grandmother was also a coffee farmer. It's kind of funny because I knew it all the way since I was little. I heard that my maternal grandmother, she lived in a farm, that she grew up in a farm. She would tell me stories of her life when she was 7, 8, cooking for farmers and picking coffee. And then I had the other side of the spectrum, which was my grandfather, my maternal grandfather. And he was kind of the hero because he was also a farmer, but he was the one that had a lot of businesses and he prospered and he was like really well known. He founded a little town in Colombia. So I think my grandmother's story got like overshadowed by my grandfather, and I always remember my grandfather. And when I started working in coffee, because I'm the only person in my family that works in coffee currently, and my mother has 20 siblings, and I'm the only one that works in coffee. I remember always hearing, "Oh my God, my father or our grandfather will be so proud." And my grandmother was still alive, so she passed away. And then when I started creating all the stories for this book, I will go back to like the main city and sit in cafes, just like all of these. That was like the places where I wrote most of the stories. And I would like digest all these interviews and kind of read in between lines, because sometimes they don't tell you exactly what they meant, but in between lines you can see. So I remember sitting there, and there was a particular story, it's the first one in the book, Juana Ramirez, and I was reading through the interview and reading, and I was like, I heard this story before. Someone has told me this before, so familiar. And then it just like dawned on me. I was like, oh my God, this is my grandmother's. My grandmother was also the one responsible for her siblings when she was 7 and 8. Not because her mother abandoned them, but because her mother was suffering from mental health issues at the time, which they don't call it mental health issues, but she was suffering from depression. So she couldn't attend the children. And it dawned on me, and I felt so guilty. I was like, this is incredible that I had never honored my grandmother for all the work she's done as a farmer. And I remember I started crying, and I called my mom pissed. I was like, why haven't we told my grandmother that she was so strong, a farmer working in a farm? This is incredible. Like, now this is gonna be my motivation to finish this book. And really, it was my fuel. And the book, the way that is designed and how the narrative flows and the chapters where like the names and everything is based on my grandmother's life experiences.
Oh, okay.
So there's a lot, like after publishing the book now, it's been almost a year and a half, I realized more and more that no matter how like objective you want to be as an artist, your art is always about you. So the more I look at the book, I'm like, oh, this is me, this is my story, this is my roots. So yeah.
Yeah, I would say resilience, when you read the stories, resilience to me is what comes out of it, because every woman has had a struggle, some more than others for sure, and it really makes you think, like it's just kind of astounding. And I was going to ask you, I know you did, these women are from age 20 to 104, which is, that's also crazy. And is there anything is there a commonality? Did you sort of feel like, was there something, a thread that ran through all of their stories, that even from the young to the very old, that was a sort of a common theme between them?
Yeah, so yeah, that was another thing that I was really, really like clear. I had it really clear in my mind, is that I wanted diversity. Not only diversity in the regions where they're from, but their ages, their ethnicity. So I have a lot of indigenous women, because that is a huge part of the Colombian population, even though it's invisible, like these women as well. But if I will say there's something common among them, it's also common among us, and it's that they're all human, living human experiences. So even though we often see like the farmers that grow any of our foods, not only coffee, anything, the rice we eat, the eggs we have in the morning for breakfast, is that most of these women are mothers, sorry. Most of these women are hustlers. They're hustling because they want their children to be able to have a better life that they have. They also suffer, like we all suffer somehow, right? We suffer from heartbreaks. They also suffer from heartbreaks. So that's what I would say. I think like for me, I thought I was also seeing them as kind of like, I was looking up and looking them looking at them down, saying like, oh, they're farmers, like poor farmer. And it's this narrative that we keep saying like, oh, farmers, yeah, of course it's so hard for them to work, it's such a physical labor, it's really hard. And yeah, I get it. But I always tell people here, like, don't you work hard? Don't you wake up early? Don't you spend 10 hours in front of a computer? Do you think that's like quality of life? Yeah, and then you compare these farmers, and yeah, they have such physical labor.
It's physical, yeah.
It's an endeavor that it requires a lot of physical labor, but then they get to enjoy fresh air. They get to enjoy the most beautiful landscape. So I always say, like, I don't think their lives are better or worse. They're just different from ours. So I would say we're all the same. Humans living human experiences. Yeah.
It seems that the farms are multi-generational. I saw some of the stories where there would be a grandmother, mother, and grandkids. Do you think these women will pass the farms? Do you think they'll go down to their daughters? Do you think that will be something that will continue in their families?
That's a great question, and I think that's one that we all should be rooting for because it's not happening. A lot of the younger generations, they don't see coffee as their future because they see it's hard to make a living, a good living out of it. They see it's hard to work in a farm. And the other aspect is that most of the parents, they have a different mindset and they say, well, I couldn't afford to go to university. I couldn't afford to leave the farm. So you are gonna leave the farm. You're gonna go to a different country. And you see a lot of kids, like children of farmers that live here in the US or live in like major cities of Colombia. So unfortunately, that is the biggest concern for the coffee industry. Like handing down farms to who? There's not.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. I was going to say, how do you see the future of the women in coffee farms evolving? Is there an evolution of it, or do you think it'll? I guess there.
It's hard to know. Of course, you see, as you mentioned in the book, I have some stories where you see the daughters or the children now being involved and wanting to learn. But I think it's gonna be different to when we look at coffee in the future, it's gonna be different. The price, what coffee we get access to. And also the other thing is like, yeah, maybe they want to stay in the farms. And they say, yeah, I think I'm going to go to the university and then I'm going to come back with all the knowledge. Because you see a lot of this young coffee farmers, they say, I want to study agronomy because I want to be able to provide and bring all this information to the farm. But the other thing is climate change. So a lot of these farmers, depending on where their farms are located, in 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, they might not be able to grow coffee in those areas. And it's happening right now at a lower percent, but it's happening. So who knows if they will be able to do it. But it's an interesting question, and one that I do see young people in the coffee industry, but I also see a lot of people just say, no, I want to go to a different country.
And I wonder if that relates to women in other agricultural areas, whether that's something that transcends the women in coffee into other areas of agriculture that we aren't made aware of. Like your book really makes you more aware of what you think you sort of knew a little bit, but not really. You know.
And it's also the mindset that I was mentioning before. So for them, how it works is that, so for most people in a big city, in a different country where these products are not grown, we see as like, oh my God, that's so hard to do, poor them. But for them, for a lot of them, I wouldn't generalize, but for a lot of them, they have this mindset that, oh, people in the city are better. I'm not from the city, so there's some things I cannot do. Now add to that, if it's a woman, that we already have been so oppressed, even here in big cities and in countries that are way more developed. So they say, well, I'm like under anyone in the city, so that's what I want to do. It's inspirational. I want to do what I see on TV. I want to do what I see people do in the city, not knowing where the consequences are, because as I was saying before, who knows if the quality of life of that person is going to be better in a city. So I think it goes like both ways.
Yeah, who knows, with technology and things like that, they might be able to actually evolve and advance their own coffee farms through something that they might learn and then return back to the farm and make it more productive. Are there any favorites? All the stories are so interesting of women. Is there one or two that you'd like to just sort of share a little bit of that, just to make someone aware of like the way the book is laid out and sort of this personal
Yeah, there are many. So as I said, I visited 62, and in the book there are only 25 stories. It was hard. hard to choose, but you gotta do what you gotta do to make a book 200 pages. But one that resonates with me even today is the story of Hilma Cupake. So Hilma is a farmer from Gaitania, Tolima. So this is a region in Colombia that has a lot of story behind, because I don't know if you guys are aware, but in Colombia for the longest time we had an armed conflict with this group in Colombia, this guerrilla group. So this region is basically where this group was created and where they settled and where all the violence happened in this region. In other regions too, but this was the main region. So a lot of the people from this region have been stigmatized by Colombians in general and by people from other countries. So a lot of people think like, oh, everyone from there is from that group. So when you go to this region, you see that it hasn't been explored that much. Like the coffee farms and the landscape is like a jungle. Like you look at the mountains, like wow. Because where I come from, we grow coffee traditionally, but we have like the most developed infrastructure. You go to a farm in 5 minutes. To go to a farm there, it takes you hours. So to get to her farm, it was it was a journey. And when I arrived there, she was my same age. So that immediately hit me. I was like, oh, she's my age. But she was mother of 3 kids already. So I was like, wow, my same age, 3 kids already. And she had like the most beautiful smile, and she started telling me like how it happened. And she said like, I'm an indigenous woman from Cauca, which is another region, and they just were displaced for this conflict, and they ended up in this area. And then we went into the kitchen, and she was like, I'll make you some coffee. I was like, yeah, cool, let's sit in the kitchen. That's where most of my interviews happen, in the kitchens. And then I started looking at the wall, and I was like, where are all these Post-it notes?
Oh, the Post-its.
Yeah, so I was like, where are all these Post-it notes? So I went closer to the Post-it notes, and then I saw it was the, like, let's say spoon. So in English, spoon. Then the pronunciation, and then the meaning in Spanish. So cuchara, spoon. And I was like, what is all of this? And it was for everything. So pot, plate, like all the utensils of a kitchen. I was like, this is so interesting. And she was like, yeah, I'm learning English. I was like, what do you mean? And she's like, yeah, I'm taking online classes. I was like, so you have internet here? She's like, yeah, I have a computer. I go every night. I take classes online. And that resonated with me a lot, because when I was 3, 4, 5 years old, my parents, in a good way, my parents were obsessed with me learning English, and my sister. Like for my mom, since I was little, I always remember her telling me, you need to learn English, because she didn't learn. So she's like, you need to learn English. And how did I learn English those first years? With Post-it notes around my home, the same. So when I saw that, I was like, oh, this is my childhood there. And I think a lot of people, like a lot of immigrants, we have an extra challenge, which is learning that language. And why was the reason that Hilma is learning English is because she wants to have a conversation with her clients, like customers, coffee customers, like in English. She's like, I don't want them to always have to bring someone that has to translate. I want to be able to communicate directly. So that's one that really surprised me, and how different we are, even though we are the same age from the same country. She speaks another dialect, and it's Spanish. I have no idea how to speak that dialect. So that's one that really, really hit me, and I think like a lot of people can resonate with that, because I was just talking with someone before the talk, and she was saying, I'm learning Spanish. I said, there you go. So we're always learning new languages. So that's one. And the other one that I want to mention briefly is the story of Edith Enciso. Why do I want to talk about her? Because if you guys were out here in the cafe, there was a coffee there called Enciso from this farmer, Edith Enciso. So she happens to be from the same region, Gaitania, Tolima. And for me, it was really important today to bring the product, and the product that was produced by one of the protagonists, at least from one of the protagonists of the book, because I think that really connects. It's like you're drinking, you're seeing the story, like you create a bridge. Her story is really interesting too, because she was born in Gaitania, in the town. She comes from the family that were the first settlers in that area. And she was the first woman from Gaitania, from in Colombia to win the Cup of Excellence in Colombia. So the Cup of Excellence is a contest in each coffee producing country where you submit a sample of your coffee, and they all like participate in this contest and they choose the best coffees, the best. That's what it's called, the Cup of Excellence. And she won this one in 2008, I think it was, and she was the first woman from Gaitania. So knowing that it's such a stigmatized region, and when I asked her about so why was this coffee so special? And she was like, well, the funny thing, Lucia, is that coffee, when we were picking that coffee, it was in the middle of a battle, and literally a battle. So she was telling me all these coffee workers and pickers, they head down to the area where they had the coffee plantation. And while they were picking this coffee, there were bullets going back and forward. And they picked this coffee, and this is the coffee that won.
Wow.
So the coffee you guys had out there is from that farm, the same farm where this happened some years ago. And she is the leader of her farm. She works with her husband and her son, but she's the one that is the boss. Yeah, she's the one doing everything. And her coffee is special because usually when you have a coffee farm, you can sell coffee to whoever you want. And you have coffee of different qualities. Always, no matter how good of a job you do, because it also depends on the climate, if it was raining more than usual, if it was really dry. So there are a lot of factors that come into coffee production. But her coffee, all her crop always gets sold to this roaster. That is
one roaster.
Yeah, one roaster that is called Coffee Collective, and they're in Denmark.
Wow.
So everything she grows always goes there.
How big is her farm?
She has now 2 farms, but her first farm, this one is called La Isla, is almost 3 hectares. I think that would be 7 for you guys is acres. Yeah. Yes.
Wow. That's great. What's something when someone reads the book, what do you hope that the reader will walk away with the feeling of after they've sort of read the stories and seen the photographs? What's your dream that someone will feel after they've read the book?
Well, first is I've been living in the U.S. since 2020, and I've been here before that many times. And something that I always notice is the passion and the love for coffee.
That's for sure.
Yeah, that for me, I was always so happy and smiley when I saw just how passionate and they really want to learn, and they're proud of saying, I drink 20 cups a day.
Yes. Yes.
So when I moved here and then I went back to Colombia, I felt now I live there. Now this is my home. This is my new home. So what I wanted to the main goal of this book was okay, I want to connect those passionate human beings in the US to the humans behind this coffee. I want them to think twice when they're making this coffee or drinking this coffee, to say, there's a mother behind this. Oh, there's a hustler just like me behind this. Oh, there's someone that is also waking up early, working a lot, drinking coffee to stay awake, drinking coffee to have the energy. So for me, I think that's the main thing I wanted to get from the book. And when you read the book, anyone can read the book, because that was the first thing I decided on. I didn't want this book to be just for coffee experts. So when you read the book, you understand everything.
Yes.
It's not about coffee production, because that's not what we are
not
here
at all.
for. Yeah. So that's what I wanted. I want consumers to understand, engage consumers, and also the value of women in society that we forget a lot. And I always like to say that my motto is making the invisible visible. And I think you guys sitting here, purchasing the book, reading the book, you're helping me. You are becoming part of that revolution of making the invisible visible.
I think it's a perfect just time to mention why you chose the title of the book.
Yeah.
Because I feel like this sort of all ties in.
Yeah, that's beautiful, yeah. So, We Belong. At first, when I named and titled the book We Belong, it was almost like a statement. We also belong to coffee. We're women, we also belong to coffee. After publishing the book, I started questioning myself more. Why do we belong? How do we belong? So since I was little, I left Colombia when I was 16 years old. I went to China, then I went to Argentina for university. Now I live here. So most of my life I spent outside of Colombia. And one of my biggest concerns and struggles is that I always felt like I didn't belong anywhere. When I was in Colombia, I was not Colombian enough anymore. When I'm here, I'm not American enough. When I live in Argentina, the same. When I was in China, you're not from here, you don't even look like us. So that was like always my concern. And then when I look at my portfolio and I realized that I didn't have photos of women, I was like, oh my God, they feel just like me, like they don't belong. But after publishing the book, and this is like the beautiful thing, I always say this book has taught me more than I would have ever imagined, and their stories. It reconnected me to my roots, and now I can proudly say I am freaking Colombian. Like I don't have to say that I'm not. Why do we belong? To belong is to be heard. But before we can be heard, we need to understand our own story, our personal story. And I think all of us here, women, I think most, our stories women's stories have been stories of absence. What that means is that we are not part of history, we're not part of like, when you look at like studies and statistics of different like medical studies, women are not taken into consideration. Same with coffee, same with like the day-to-day life. So really, it is our responsibility as women to go back to learn where we come from, who was before us, what we are, what like define us, to then have a story and say we belong like confidently, because you know who you are, you know your identity. And when you're proud and you're confident of your story, then you foster a space, like a common ground, where you're gonna be open to hear other perspectives, and you're not gonna attack, or you're not gonna say it's your responsibility to change men, like the men in society.
And other people listen to you too.
Exactly.
As well. I think when you present that you know and you're confident in your own story, whatever your story is, you sort of present that confidence and then, you know, are heard.
Yeah, and you understand like which are your like talents and which are your struggles. So for me, that's where belong comes from, and it has grown into something bigger. And I feel like we all should be like walking this path of belonging more and more. And women more than anything, because if we're confident in where we come from, who we are, what we want, then there's not gonna be a fight. We're gonna become allies, and we're gonna understand that everyone has a different perspective. How can we have a common ground to change and to have a society where there's a more gender equity, which we need anywhere, not only in coffee.
And with that, this guy is going to come up and silence. No, we want to have some time for Q&A. Thank you so much. That was a lovely story. That was fantastic. That was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We've got a little bit for Q&A right now. Does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask either Lucia or Deborah?
Hi, I loved hearing your story. And I wondered whether you had planned a Spanish language version of your book.
That's a great story. So, a great question, sorry. My book is actually bilingual in the same book. So when you open the book, you're gonna see that you have English and Spanish side by side. It has even become like an educational tool for people that are learning Spanish or English, because they can go back and forth and learn. So yeah. No, thank you.
I'll stand back here.
Hi, I was wondering, it intrigues me how there's so many women, I had no idea, that own these or ran these coffee farms, and I'm wondering two things. One is, you mentioned that some of the farms, or a lot of the farms, are actually in the name of the husbands of men. So I'm wondering, I know in a lot of countries, women were not allowed to own property. So I'm wondering if that's what was happening in Colombia. And my second question is, how did this become a profession that women were allowed and encouraged to go into?
Perfect, yeah. No, I think you explained it really well, because that's what happened. So if you look at history, like women were not allowed to own any property. That is not the case anymore. Now we are allowed to own property in Colombia, but because of that, generation after generation, the men in the families were the ones getting like these properties. What is happening now a lot is that some of the husbands are selling parts of the farm to the women, or there are other projects that are helping women like acquire land that is not coffee production. It's just land that they need to work on. But it's happening more and more. It also, I feel like it's a lot of fear of not knowing how to do it. So funny enough, when you look at the statistics in Colombia, a lot of farmers, they don't have a bank account. So they don't even have like a good understanding of how to do the step-by-step to buy a land. But I think that's changing, and there are a lot of companies like helping and facilitating like different workshops where they can learn more about their finances and how to do it. And then the other question, which is about when and how did these women become like farmers. I think this has been forever. When you look at the history of a lot of the countries in Central and South America and in Mexico, that have to include where coffee is being grown on this side of the world, they have always been in these farms. They have always helped some way or another. Of course, because coffee production, a lot of the labor and a lot of the activities are like physical, like demanding. Women cannot do a lot of these activities. But now what they're realizing is that women are more detail oriented and they like make sure things are done perfect. So they're the ones that are in charge of the quality. So after you pick the coffee, then you have to process the coffee. And that part of the coffee production is as important, if not most important, than the picking. Because if you mess up with that, then you end up with like horrible coffee. And that's where a lot of these women come into the picture. They're the ones making sure the coffee is being dried properly, is being the post-processing, which is like taking the husk out of the cherry, is being done properly. So I think they're always been there. Again, I feel it's because for centuries, women were not allowed to speak out. They were not allowed, they were not recognized. We didn't know this, we just took it for granted or ignored it. But they're always been there. They've always been growing coffee, and they grew up in those farms, and they know every step of the process. I would even say like better than some of the men in the farms.
We'll move up to the front.
Thank you so much. Enjoyed your share so much. I was just wondering, is it an issue maintaining and keeping the independent farmers? Are there big corporations coming in and trying to buy up?
It's a great question, and I think in Colombia there is a region where we've been seeing that. But the good thing is when you think about coffee production in Colombia, most of the farmers are small coffee families, and they have small farms. And I think it's gonna stay that way because it has become so hard to find labor, like outside labor. So to find workers to pick this coffee in the peak of the season is so difficult now because of all the immigration. So these people are leaving the countries for better opportunities because this work of being workers in a farm they were not getting paid like enough. So now no one wants to pick coffee. So a lot of farmers, they don't want to grow. They want to stay small because that's the only way that the family, they can manage the coffee farm. So I think that is the beauty of Colombia. And in Colombia, I would say like most coffee farms, everything is done manually. It's different if you go and think of Brazil. In Brazil, everything is done industrially. They have machines for everything. They have these machines that shake the coffee trees, and then all the coffee cherries just fall down, and then they just have like a big piece of like a claw, and they just pull it. But in Colombia, that's not the case. Of course, there are people that are not from Colombia that are coming into Colombia, and they see the value of growing coffee, and they buy the huge farm. But I don't think that ultimately that's not sustainable because all the different issues happening, the labor, the climate change. So yeah, that's like the situation in Colombia.
Question over there.
Okay, my grandmother, who died before I was born, my father, the French Canadians immigrated to Illinois. Purpose of my asking this question is, what do you feed 20 to 40 pickers? Because my grandmother had to get up and she would take 8 loaves of bread out of the oven every day at 10 o'clock in the morning. But she fed people at like 6 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 1 o'clock, and then the evening meal.
Oh yeah. These are like big portions. Like when you go to a farm and you say, please, can you serve me just half of that? They're like, no. This is what we eat here. So usually like we, of course, like corn is a big product throughout Central and South America. So we have something called arepas that are like the Mexican tortillas, but thicker. So that is like a must in Colombia. Then beans, always, like black beans. And then some kind of meat, chicken, red meat, maybe a little bit of salad, rice, potatoes. We love the carbs in Colombia. Like 80% of the dish is just carbs. I think a lot of guys in the US will be happy. But funny enough, it depends where you go in Colombia, because if you go to the north, you might get fish because of the location. If you go to the south, you might get guinea pig because that's closer to Ecuador. But yeah, big portions, a lot of food. And the funny thing is, like, something I heard when I was traveling is that the workers that don't live in the farm, they don't belong to these families, they rate the food in the different farms and they choose, okay, I think I want to work in this farm because the food is better. So food is so important.
A wonderful story. I thought it was excellent because a lot of us who drink coffee don't realize the work involved in producing coffee. But can you take us through the economics? How are they compensated, and how does the coffee migrate to the areas in the world like the coffee shops and the cafes? It gets to that, and now we're spending $3, $4, $5 for a cup of coffee. Are they well compensated in the farms?
Well, that's a big question. And one that I think anyone in the coffee industry will be scared to answer. But what I would tell you is, like, it depends a lot, because as I was saying, farmers are allowed to sell their coffee to whomever. They don't have a contract with anyone. Even though you might sell the coffee to the same company year after year, if the third year you don't want to sell to them, you're not required to sell to them. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that we have to consider the size of the farms in Colombia. So farms in Colombia are really small. So it's hard for a farmer just to sell directly to someone here in the US, to do like a direct transaction, because it's not enough coffee to export. So what happens in Colombia is that they sell the coffee to an exporter. The exporters buy coffee from a lot of farms. And how this goes about is that every Sunday during the harvest season, in Colombia we're lucky that we have coffee throughout the year. Most countries don't. They have like one harvest, and only coffee gets like harvest in those months, and that's it. In Colombia we have coffee throughout the year, which is incredible. It's like a special situation. So how it goes is like every Sunday these farmers go down from their farms and they bring the coffee to these small towns where there are different companies, a lot of competitors, and they choose where to sell the coffee depending on the price. And the price is based on the market, because coffee is a commodity. And there's, depending on the quality of your coffee, the company that is buying your coffee and the projects they have, they might offer like a bonification. Sometimes you have like a certification that is fair trade or organic, so you get a little bit more. But it really varies. What I will say is, like, the big conversation in coffee, even for people that have spent 20, 30, 50 years in coffee, is like, are farmers being compensated enough? And for a lot of people, the answer is no, they're not. It's so little. And then they compare the price this coffee is being sold or paid, to these farmers, to the $3, $4, $5 that you're paying here, and it seems like there's a big gap. Like, it's a lot of money here, it's nothing in Colombia. But how I see it is that we cannot compare from country to country, because running a cafe requires a lot of money and labor, and there are more things, and like it's more strict to have a business here than in other countries. You need to have so many things, so many certifications for so many things. So at the end, it's not that they're getting a lot of money, it's just different, because it's different countries, money has different value. I do think like we should be paying not only coffee, any other food in the world more. Because as I was saying to someone before, like we forget that if it wasn't for all those people living in those farms, growing coffee, growing chocolate, growing rice, growing any vegetable, we wouldn't be able to eat those things and enjoy those things. So I do think there is an imbalance. How do you fix that? It's really tough. Who do you charge more? Is it the consumer that is gonna pay now $7, $8, so then they can say we're paying that extra to the farmer? I don't think consumer will be happy to be paying $8, $10. But yeah, I think there is not a defined answer. I feel like being a farmer, I wouldn't say is the most profitable profession in the world, but it's definitely one that is invaluable, that I think is really important in society.
Any other questions? I'll take one more, and then we'll close this out.
Okay, thank you. There is another question. We are the best friend from college from Lucia's mom. And I want to tell Lucia how proud your mom, we like best friend feeling from you. You are a proud Latin to get into to have that you have now. Your professionalism, your feeling, all your story is so proud for all of us. Congratulations.